Great. So we're started. We're live. How you doing, man?
What could be better? I got tea, I got a cigar. I'm talking to you about Bitcoin. What's better
What
than
more do you
that? Come
need in
on.
life? What more do you need in
What more
life?
do you need in life?
So
Everyone
this,
wants this fancy stuff. I don't need fancy stuff.
so this is our inaugural look into Bitcoin. It's unnamed at the minute. The inaugural unnamed look into Bitcoin casual discussions, we'll call it for now. But I'm sure you'll give us some great quotable headlines throughout this little talk. So first and foremost, can you just give us a quick, brief introduction to who you are?
Yeah, so my name is British HODL. I'm an investor from the United Kingdom, born and raised in London. I got my start in real estate and then stocks and then gold. Thought Bitcoin was a scam for a very, very long time until 2020. And then the penny dropped. And I had this visceral panic about not having enough Bitcoin. And then I just went down the rabbit hole and here we are.
I think we've all felt that before, that kind of just sinking feeling. It's maybe unique to initial cryptocurrency investments of just the, oh wow, it clicks in your head and you realize the necessity for crypto and Bitcoin, and at that point it is just how do I get all in as fast as I can. So what actually made you make that first kind of, oh damn, this is something that is going to change finance?
It was Saifedean. I was listening to the Bitcoin Standard, and a friend of mine who I very much respect, who also thought Bitcoin was a scam, had suddenly listened to the Bitcoin Standard and become a Bitcoin fanatic. And so he said, "You need to listen to this book, and then we're going to have a conversation." So it was during the pandemic, and I was walking around the park like a moron listening to this book, and he just mentioned stock to flow. Like before he went into it, he just mentioned the idea of stock to flow. And having a gold background, it was almost like the matrix just cleared out the way. And I could see exactly. I was like, I have been thinking of Bitcoin like an equity, and I should have been thinking of it like a commodity. And I just knew I'd fucked up, basically. I don't know if I can swear. Is that all right or no?
Go for it. Go for it.
Oh,
As I
cool.
said, first one, we have no rules here. Uh,
All right.
Whatever you feel like. You're smoking cigars, you're drinking some tea. We'll get some swear words in there.
It's 8 p.m. at night. What else are you supposed to do?
It's 8 a.m. in the morning here. I think we may have picked the complete opposite ends of the world for this discussion, which is great.
But that's powerful, though, isn't it? Because think about it. Like, if right now we were doing business and I wanted to get capital over to you, I would need to wait until tomorrow morning. No matter where I was banking in the world, I would need to wait until tomorrow morning to file a transfer request, which would then take 7 hours for some human being to check it and then be sent over, and then some moron on your side to check it and then be credited into. So we're looking at a minimum of 48 hours between us saying yes and you getting the money. And with Bitcoin, if I wanted to do business with you, within 20 minutes, you can have the money.
Yeah, I
Any
think especially as we go forward and it maybe becomes kind of the base settlement layer for large international transactions, there's just nothing comparable. I mean, how much would it cost to send $1 billion of gold halfway across the planet?
it's yeah, I think it's probably 10 to 20 million dollars to do that.
So, on that topic, would you classify Bitcoin as money or a commodity? Or is it both?
It's both. Right now, it's at the store of value level, right? It needs to become a store of value. And once it becomes a store of value, then we can start looking at how to transact with it. I think Bitcoin becomes the base layer, as you said, and then something else gets put on top of it to allow the fast international transactions that we need. Unfortunately, I'm not the Bitcoin maxi, which thinks that you're going to be transacting on the Bitcoin network in Satoshis for good. I don't think goods are going to be priced in Satoshis. I think there will be other currencies, but they will be built on Bitcoin layers, rails eventually.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I could see definitely a situation in that regard. I think it may be, at least at this point in time, a little bit optimistic to imagine complete hyper Bitcoinization where we just do all transactions in Bitcoin. And especially at this stage when, like you said, it's still obtaining that store of value title. it's still growing and maturing as an asset class, and no one wants to be the guy that pays 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza right now. So its use as a money currently is speculative, to say the least. But
Well, you think about it and you go, well, right now it is a money, right? Right now its use as a currency might not be appropriate, but its use as money is completely appropriate, right? Like that's it. That's an interesting distinction that we fail to make, and I think it's quite important. I think right now Bitcoin, it's not it shouldn't at this point. Anyone who's, I always say this, like anyone who is buying Bitcoin, which is the hardest asset humanity has ever created, and then deciding to buy a piece of fucking art with it because they want to support the community is a moron. But that's my perspective. Like, you should be holding on to your Bitcoin as hard as humanly possible at this point. You should not be looking to sell it. You should not be looking to spend it. You should not be looking to, make yourself feel better by going to, just shouldn't do anything. Just hold on to it. Just buy Bitcoin, shut the fuck up, and you get fabulously wealthy. It's very, very simple.
absolutely. So I know you're a big proprietor of the bullishness of potential ETF approvals, specifically in regards to BlackRock. Could you just give us a little bit more info on that? How do you think a Bitcoin ETF will have an immediate and long-term impact on Bitcoin?
I think the ETF is the single most important event for Bitcoin since Bitcoin. And the reason for that is that if I ask you about treasury bills right now, there's probably less than 50 to 100,000 people in the world that truly understand how treasury bills work, how bonds work, right? There's less than, but every person who has a mutual fund is invested in them, right? That's the benefit of an ETF, because now nobody needs to worry about self-custody. Nobody needs to worry about, what is this asset? How does it work? It just gets handled for you, and you get your exposure, and you can say, the beautiful thing is you can say, I'm a Bitcoin investor without even knowing about it. And that is beautiful for Bitcoin. There's obviously going to be the purists, and I agree. If we finally have a bearer instrument of an asset, you should probably take some responsibility and learn how to actually bear that asset. But the fact is, most people won't. Most people don't do that. Most assets at a scalable level are not bearer instruments. Like, property is not a bearer instrument. Stocks are not a bearer instrument. So, and most of gold is not a bearer instrument.
No, the divergence between paper gold and physical gold now, I think, has grown so exponentially that it's hard to classify the two as the same. So you could potentially see a future in which the 60-40 of equity bonds for traditional portfolios becomes the 50-40-10, with Bitcoin taking up the minority of a portfolio.
Yeah, of course. There's a reason why BlackRock's into this. BlackRock, the biggest purveyor of ESG investments, has basically said that ESG is almost dead. They've closed down their ESG funds, from what I read, and they're coming out into Bitcoin. And suddenly, I said this the second that they filed for the ETF, I said, within a very short period of time, you're going to see a major news publication come out and say Bitcoin is ESG friendly. Why? Because Bitcoin is the ESG savior for BlackRock.
Was it KS? I can't remember the accounting firm that recently actually came out.
KPMG.
Exactly. Yeah.
KPMG. Yeah. So they came out a few weeks later. But what I'm talking about is like New York Times or Washington Post, one of the mainstream publications, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that KPMG came out and said it is huge too.
It's already kind of the start of the narrative shift to fit the agenda of Bitcoin becoming this ESG suitable asset. So
ESG 2.0, baby, let's go. Like, yes, let's just hold up the pom-poms, unlock that $60 trillion of capital. And yes, Bitcoin is ESG friendly. The good thing about Bitcoin is when you try and change Bitcoin, Bitcoin ends up changing you. And so if they want to say, okay, cool, we're going to bring Bitcoin into the ESG narrative, Bitcoin will change the ESG narrative. And so I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't complain. So I'm sure you've seen the charts of gold when gold had its initial ETF release, where we see this exponential run up in price now that it becomes considerably easier to park your capital and inject liquidity into these markets. Could you imagine a similar kind of price reaction for Bitcoin?
Better because of the finality of the supply on Bitcoin, right? So gold went up from $350 an ounce to a run up of what, 2 grand in a
Something
very,
like that,
very
yeah.
8 year window. And so when you factor that in, it went up 350%. And then you go, okay, cool. So let's say Bitcoin's at 40,000 when an ETF is approved. You got 350% up. It takes you to roughly what, 150, something like that. But then you factor in the fact that you've got finality of supply, all this capital coming in. Bank of America has always or has already said that the bull market multiple is $1 goes into Bitcoin and $118 gets added to the market cap when you're at the squeeze moment of the bull market. So you factor that in, you could be looking at a $10 million Bitcoin pretty easily with the ETF, just the ETF over the next decade.
Wow.
Humanity's never experienced an asset that's finite. We've
No,
never experienced.
I completely agree. And I think Bitcoin's monetary innovations are probably its strongest selling point. I think as soon as people really appreciate the disinflationary model and the limited supply, it's an inevitability at that point, the exponential price increase, because it's just simple supply and demand. As soon as you see supply dwindling and demand increasing, it's basic economics that you'll see some price appreciation following that.
Price goes up, right? People hodl more. Price goes down, people hodl more, as you can see on the charts that you guys show, right? Like, which other asset do you know where the price drops 80% and 80% of the people just go, well, fuck you, I'm holding this.
Yeah.
Any major scale asset, you don't see that. So this is that because people understand instinctively. We have this in our bones. We understand as human beings what true scarcity is. We understand, we are trained through evolution to pursue true scarcity and acquire it and possess it. And that's what we'll do with Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I mean, at the minute, it kind of fulfills that desirable asset sort of title. But I think as it grows even more exponentially, being able to tell people I own a whole Bitcoin, it becomes this entirely new thing where it's more than a desirable asset, and it becomes again a necessity to hold it.
It becomes a Veblen good.
Yeah,
it becomes a Veblen good. It's just like it's a luxury asset at this point. If I can walk into my group of wealthy friends and say I'm the only one that owns a whole Bitcoin because you guys messed up, and here's the thing, they can never catch up. So it's not like I can buy a Patek Philippe watch and then they have an opportunity to catch up at some point. There is no catching up. Like, think about it. I keep saying that because I don't think people understand what I'm saying. Like, there is no opportunity to catch up ever. You miss this, you're done.
You think as soon as it's approved, the train's left the station and it's...
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think it takes a little bit of time for capital to come in. But again, I'm thinking on a 10 to 20 year timeline. So if an ETF gets approved this year or next year, like I'm talking about in 20 years time. In 20 years time, you're never going to be able to catch up. Like outside of the miraculous. Like if I want to have children, right? Like I always say this. My dad immigrated to the United Kingdom. He could buy 10 properties at that time. I, 30, 40 years later, can still buy 10 properties. I might not be able to buy the same 10 properties in the same area, et cetera, but I can still buy 10 properties. What are you going to do with Bitcoin? Like, if my kids want a single Bitcoin outside of the miraculous where they create a unicorn business that they sell for, $1 billion, $100 million, $200 million, whatever it is, they're fucked.
Yeah.
So I mean, this choice of this asset, to own this asset for my progeny, entirety of human history, is on my shoulders. That's how serious this asset is. And people are fucking buying pieces of art with it. Do you understand why I get so pissed off by this?
Well, you don't value digital monkeys at tens of thousands of Bitcoin.
I'm not even talking like that's just stupid. I'm not even talking about it. I'm talking about the people that are like, oh, I painted something, and if you want to, and it's got I painted a Bitcoin logo, and if you want to support the community, then you can buy my Bitcoin logo painting for XYZ number of Bitcoin. That's what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? You'd have to pry my Bitcoin away from my cold, dead hands.
Absolutely. So obviously, we've discussed the bullish aspects of an ETF approval. Are there any drawbacks in your mind that you think may actually not hinder the Bitcoin price appreciation, but Bitcoin as an asset could potentially be taken back?
I think that there's always everything's based on probabilities in life. And I think the probabilities of Bitcoin being banned in the United States have shrunk to less than 1%. I think, last cycle they had shrunk to less than 5% for me based on how it was being taxed. Once an asset is being taxed in a particular way, it's pretty much set, ready to go. But yeah, I think there's less than 1% probability that it gets banned in the US. I think the US adopts it and figures out how to control it and tax it like every other asset.
Yeah, I completely. As soon as people can line the pockets with an asset, they're going to figure a way to keep lining the pockets with it. But
Exactly.
in regards to potentially, I know the larger ETF filings are spot Bitcoin, meaning they need to be actually backed by real Bitcoin. But as we move to kind of a paper Bitcoin future, do you think that kind of mitigates the scarcity element? Is if we can in the future
No,
fractionalize the Bitcoins or anything?
no, because that's done on the futures markets. And the futures markets have always been around, right? And when you study the lawsuits that have happened against JP Morgan, for example, for gold manipulation, it's like fractions of a percent of profit that they've made. And the biggest lawsuit that was ever done, everyone likes talking about this because everyone likes doom and gloom, boomer fear mongering bullshit. But the biggest lawsuit that was done was JP Morgan spoofing the market. Now, all that means is, let's say gold is trading at 1900 an ounce. They'll go in and put in a bunch of orders at 1800 an ounce. And as the price starts cascading down because these orders get filled, they close their $1,800 order so that therefore now they can acquire it and the price shoots back up again. That's it. That's normal market process. There, you would in order for the type of co-opting to happen that people are talking about, you'd have to violate securities laws, commodities trading laws. You'd have to completely circumvent the market structure of the United States capital markets in order for that to happen. That's just not going to happen. You'd need political alignment on a level that you're never going to get in the US. So a lot of that is fear mongering from doom and gloom boomers that want to sell newsletters, in my opinion.
No, valid points. I completely agree. So, could you see Bitcoin becoming more of a hedge asset, kind of similar to gold in the future, especially once we kind of get this more traditional adoption?
Bitcoin is nowhere near similar to gold.
Okay.
I think that to me is Wall Street's best lie so far. Bitcoin is similar to gold because Bitcoin is not a dead asset. I can use Bitcoin and look at what Strike's doing. It's fucking phenomenal, right? They're using Bitcoin as a base layer to transact currencies around the world instantly. That's a $7 trillion a day market that is active use on Bitcoin. That gives Bitcoin actual real value to use on a daily basis. So there's that. There's other lending facilities you can build on Bitcoin. There's a lot of things that Bitcoin can do. Bitcoin to me is land in an environment where land is scarce. That's what Bitcoin is. It's land in an environment where land is scarce. I mean, you're from London, right? Or whereabouts in the UK are you from?
Further north in York.
Right. Okay. So let's pretend you're from London. All right.
Okay.
Because I don't know. I haven't spent much time in New York. But, it's like, for example, someone saying, like, all of the properties that are ever going to be built in human history are going to be built in Knightsbridge, like in the land space of Knightsbridge,
Yeah.
right? Or like Manhattan, for example. Do you want to own a property or do you want to own a piece of that land in Manhattan, like or Knightsbridge? I want to own the land. Like I want you to build on my stuff and then and then pay me a royalty for it. I want you to build an internet company and pay me a royalty for using my piece of the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. True digital scarcity and desirability, I think, is even now after the growth from fractions of a penny to nearly $70,000, I think is still being underestimated. And like you said,
Absolutely.
that the untapped market of international settlements and how it could facilitate trillions of dollars of real transactions globally, unlike anything else, is still, I think, being kind of understated how big an impact that can have on the financial markets.
Yeah, I mean, PayPal, the former CEO of PayPal coming out and saying what he said about Bitcoin is like, okay, you look at Jack from Strike, who I think is absolutely phenomenal, right? And Wall Street goes, oh, forget this kid. And now you got the former CEO of PayPal coming out and saying the exact same vision that Jack had years ago, that Jack's actually executed on, that PayPal can't seem to find their way around. Like, this is huge. Like, these guys are lying. Like, they're just coming on CNBC and blatantly lying because they understand it. If anyone tells me that BlackRock doesn't have 200 people whose entire life fucking mission is to figure out what Bitcoin is, you don't know what you're talking about. You think you think tweeters like me and like other people are smarter than BlackRock's 200 PhD nerds? Come on, like they're way ahead of the game more than what people think.
I'm just imagining a team of BlackRock PhD nerds getting up at 7 a.m. in the morning, getting into the office, getting on Bitcoin Twitter and having to go through all the memes and try and write that all up in reports and try and make sense of it all. But yeah,
that's exactly what's going on. That's exactly what's going on.
So you brought up PayPal, who have recently launched their own stablecoin, and we're kind of getting to that stablecoin market expansion where everyone wants a fiat pegged stablecoin, and obviously that eventually leads into the topic of CBDCs. Could you give your opinion on those?
I've got an unpopular opinion. I think they're coming, and I don't think there's anything that anyone can do to stop it. Because in order for the current financial system to survive, that has to happen. Now, there might be countries like the US where it happens later than in the United Kingdom, for example, but it's coming. There is no way that you manage to do behavioral economics with the current financial system that we have. The best way to do it is to have a digitized currency that you can control, that you can incentivize in certain ways, and get people to do certain things that you want them to do. Like, unfortunately, the way out for the US and the US dollar is significant inflation for a very short period of time, right? If they've got 130% debt to GDP ratio, if they can inflate at 100% a year for 2 years or 3 years and lower that down to 90% debt to GDP and extend the life cycle of the US dollar by another 40 years, you bet your ass that's the path they're going to take. So the best way to do that is to use a CBDC, press a button, and everyone's wallets gets a bunch of money that they can spend. So they sort of, even though the prices go up, they stay sort of at the same level.
So could you see a kind of deliberate hyperinflation in sort of more developed economies at some point in the future?
It's the only way out. Like, there's no other way. The only other way out would be someone standing up and going, we fucked up. We got to reset the whole thing. And I don't see any Western politician doing that.
No, I can't imagine any politician ever being that honest, let alone take enough responsibility to even consider the motion. But
exactly.
How would you imagine a potential de-dollarization? So we're seeing already with BRICS economies, and
I don't.
You don't see it?
No, I think that's all a bunch of bullshit. I think it's like this. Like, let's say I tell you that we're gonna trade in rupees, right? And you've got a dollar balance sheet. So you now convert that dollar balance sheet into rupees, send those rupees to me, and I take those rupees, and because I want to use them around the world, I convert them back into dollars. What the hell happened? Like, the rupees were rupees for the moment that they were being sent to me and you, and we can now send out a press article saying that we're trading in rupees. That's it. At the end of the day, all of these countries have dollar debts. Those dollar debts have to be paid in dollars. Yeah, I don't I don't see that. I think a lot of people are using that again for fear mongering. It's the same conversation that happened with Japan. It's the same conversation that happened with the USSR. The advantage that United States has is very, very special. You can feel completely comfortable being whoever you want to be in the United States because there is a state that will protect you. And at the same time, if anything happens in any state, every American says, I'm an American. And that's beautiful. That's very special. And I think that will win out over whatever is attempted to be created. So I'm
Yeah.
very bullish on the US.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's definitely a certain level of fear mongering. I think obviously the society we live in today, where it generates clicks to sort of devastate and disaster, catastrophize every single aspect of our lives, it's only the way that they can kind of fearmonger us into potentially relying on certain states more. But could you see, as opposed to a de-dollarization, potentially nations like the US ever accumulating Bitcoin for themselves? I know we've seen it on a smaller scale with El Salvador, but could you see central banks obtaining Bitcoin?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You could absolutely see a central bank putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet especially if they're trying to use it as a base layer at some point in the next 30 to 40 years. Yes, absolutely. They'll have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. We haven't, like, that demand has not even been touched yet. Like, think about it. We're talking about ETFs. We're not even talking about central banks doing all international trade on the base layer of Bitcoin.
Yeah, and at that point, it's one of those where it's impossible to imagine a situation in which there are a few 100,000 liquid Bitcoin still available, and you're having sovereign states now competing to try and accumulate just to fulfill their central bank requirements. It's hard to imagine now, but I can definitely see it as, reality in the not too distant future. Yeah,
it's terrifying. It's legitimately terrifying. When you understand finance, it is terrifying.
So we're going to potentially see an ETF, institutional demand, maybe a sovereign state demand. Could you see almost like a demand super cycle? I mean, we're obviously having the very predictable supply shocks. It's at 4-year intervals, but now we're seeing, I know everyone had that narrative last cycle that our institutions are coming and we're going to have this huge mega super cycle that's never going to end. But could you actually see that as something that could actually come to fruition going forward?
Yeah, so I was part of that herd that thought that this corporate treasuries were coming into Bitcoin. And after further thought, I realized I was completely wrong on that. Because if I was running a public company that you entrusted with your funds to enact a particular vision, and then I said, all I'm going to do is dump your money into Bitcoin, you'd tell me, give me back my money, I'll hold it in Bitcoin and reduce the extra 3 layers of risk that I've created by giving you my money. So, and plus, secondly, on top of that, the market's not that big. I mean, I think US corporate treasuries are about $7 trillion. That's in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big. I think you'll probably see less than 4% of US corporate treasuries go into Bitcoin, even after the FASB ruling over the next 10 years. I might be wrong on that, but that's my gut instinct because they need capital to actually convince the investors that they've got something to do. But yeah, I put out a video and I said, Bitcoin has never truly experienced a demand shock, right? I was looking at some reports and they said it was roughly about 40 to 60 trillion dollars that went into the whole crypto market in the last cycle in 21. And so you go, okay, well, how much was Bitcoin? Maybe 20 to 30 billion, something like that.
Yeah.
MicroStrategy was obviously a big portion of that as a minority player, right? As a single player. But I don't think the market's experienced anything like what an ETF would bring, where you're looking at $100 billion worth of demand in the first year and a half. That's like 10xing the equilibrium price from where it is, just the equilibrium, without factoring any, supply cuts or HODL wave increases or anything.
Yeah, I completely agree. But there is the argument I've seen a lot of people making that, especially with the economy in a more questionable place, that if we saw a more drawn out economic recession, if we saw a big bear market in traditional markets, could you see that negatively impacting Bitcoin in spite
Sure.
of? But even if we had the ETF approval, could you see Bitcoin still rallying during a recession, or do you think a
Absolutely.
recession would negate the ETF approval?
A recession would hamper it, but you're talking about trillions, $900 trillion worldwide, credit market already, right? And Bitcoin's a new asset. So you could see all of that. You could see 300 or $400 billion chase Bitcoin while credit's in a contraction, right? That's what people are not paying attention to. So yeah, Bitcoin is a risk on asset, which means it is affected by credit cycles. But it's a new asset, which means all the money that's still out there could decide to diversify from wherever it is into Bitcoin because it is a new asset. And that could be worth 300 or $400 billion.
Yeah, especially I know there's been a narrative of a decoupling for years now, and we're going to have some uncorrelated, sustained bull run, irrelevant of what is happening in the S&P 500, for example. But I think if we actually saw a first glimmer of that and investors had an easy way to actually gain access to the market through an ETF, then it could really quickly actually fulfill that goal of a potential hedge asset that is diversified, that isn't correlated to traditional markets, and really could be the fuel to take us even higher.
Yeah, but in the interim, I think it needs to step into an alternate risk asset, which it hasn't yet. Right now, it's a very, very speculative asset. Next step is going to be an alternative risk asset, instead of ICE, I go on to my broker account, and instead of seeing Tesla, I click sell on Tesla and I click buy on the Bitcoin ETF, right? So it's now an alternative risk asset. And then eventually it turns into a hedge asset.
And you think the ETF can be the way to kind of change investor opinion, like especially I'm thinking
The only
more,
way.
yeah, as soon
It's
as
the
they
only
kind
way.
of see that it's been legitimized by the world's largest asset manager, opinions, change like that, and suddenly it is reputable.
Here's
Suddenly
the
it
crazy
is.
thing. The crazy thing is their opinions don't even matter at that point because 500 of the top biggest asset managers in the world control $130 trillion of capital. And these are the people that everyone relies on to make their decisions. And if they go, we need a 5% allocation to Bitcoin, the person at the end of it, their opinion doesn't matter. So I actually think that we're at a point where Bitcoin awareness could become less relevant as the asset becomes more financialized. That would be heartbreakingly bad for Bitcoin, right? Because it doesn't serve the underlying purpose. But we're at a point where you're gonna be in Bitcoin without knowing that you're in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Do you think they could wrap it into an ESG index as a
Of
way
course,
to boost performance, and then suddenly, like
of
as you said,
course,
there'd be millions of people that are unknowingly exposed to the crypto markets?
absolutely, yeah. I mean, the ESG funds have compounded 5 or 6% a year. If they added, 5% allocation to Bitcoin, you suddenly boost that up to an adequate amount.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people, especially in the crypto space, are maybe a little optimistic in their belief that people, especially traditional investors and especially millionaires that are, again, just letting family funds manage all of their capital, I think they're maybe a little hopeful in assuming that they're all, I'm not implying that they're bad hat, but that they're all, oh, we need to invest in Bitcoin for the philosophical reasons, for the divergence away from the economic situation we're currently in. I think as soon as you can offer a majority of people superior percentage gains on a yearly basis, they're not going to
No
really
one gives a
care.
shit.
Exactly.
Matt, no one gives a shit. You know why? Because people like my parents who are immigrants to the United Kingdom, who have done the right thing for 35 years, invested in the country, bought property, trying to protect their two sons' futures, are now realizing that their property portfolio needs to be worth 85 to 90% more than it is in order to maintain the value that they'd hoped for. They're not worried about saving the world. They're worried about saving their future that they've worked hard for. The person who's a police officer or a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or a whatever is realizing that they've been fucked by the system. They don't care. They want to know, how am I going to protect my children? How am I going to protect my future? That's what they care about.
Yeah, completely agree. So just circling back a little bit, discussing a potential recession and maybe hampering Bitcoin's upside potential. Are you watching any traditional metrics on the economy? Are you watching any charts on liquidity, inflation, anything like that to try and gauge what may be coming?
So I think inflation is pretty much done. I think that narrative is going to continue to the downside. That's just what I think. The only thing that's worth watching is the US 2-year yield, which is known as the shadow Fed. If you look at it, the 2-year yield leads the Fed in every motion. And as soon as the Fed funds rate exceeds the 2-year yield, you're in trouble territory. And it exceeded it in March. So now we're in shit show territory, and we're going to see how long the higher for longer lasts before something really breaks. The good news is that this Fed has openly said that, if they need to reverse their position to the downside on rates, they're happy to do that very, very quickly. So that part is a good thing, but we're in danger territory at this point. So I would just watch the 2-year yield, and the 2-year yield will tell you exactly what the Fed's going to do.
Yeah, completely agree. And shameless plug, but I don't know if you've noticed the treasury yields and federal rate targets we've added to look into Bitcoin. So right now we're just filming. I'll overlay these so all the viewers can see all the sexy new charts. But yeah, glad you're hopefully finding some use out of that. And
yeah,
on the topic,
like I think you guys like I use TradingView and I use you guys, right? And I think you guys, the good thing about it is, unlike TradingView, where you go in and it's like, a Bloomberg terminal where you need to have a master's degree in knowing what to put into the chart to give it. It's a phenomenal software. Give you what you want, but you got to know what to put in. You guys just go and figure out, okay, these are the charts that people need to see, and here they are. Anyone who wants like a simple overview of charts, I always recommend them to you guys. I always
appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And you mentioned earlier, of course, stock to flow. That's obviously one of the bigger talking points in crypto, with Plan B's thesis on stock to flow and how that's going to result in considerably higher Bitcoin prices. I think the fair value is $500,000 in the next cycle. But is that something you give much credence to, the stock to flow model?
I pay attention to everything, right? And I think Plan B has gotten a lot of stick. And the reason why he's getting a lot of stick, because I think he's right on his idea of stock to flow. I think the reason why he's getting a lot of stick is because he started changing up the models to suit the bullishness that everyone wanted to see.
Yeah.
And if you just look at his original model, it's pretty accurate. It's pretty fucking accurate. Like, people don't want to talk about that, but the original model predicted a fair value price of 50,000. And it's pretty damn accurate. Like, I don't know what to tell people, So yeah, the next one says 500,000. Who knows? We might break that. We might screw that one up as well. I don't know. So I just look at it as a light entertainment, and I think it's important to study everyone's models. I think that's what the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is. I can be sitting in South America, you're sitting in Asia. Plan B sitting somewhere in Europe, and we can all put out our ideas and go, this is what we think, right? And that's beautiful.
Yeah, completely agree. Are there any other metrics you're watching? I know we mentioned about the illiquid supply of Bitcoin continuing to grow as the HODL waves kind of expand, and we're seeing less and less kind of flow of available Bitcoin. Do you think that's just going to continue to expand? Well, decrease?
Yeah, so I think there's always going to be a shift in that as the price starts to go up. But I think we're at a key inflection point right now. I think we're at a point right now where the next buyer of Bitcoin coming in is a much more legacy buyer than the buyers that we've had in the last 4 to 8 years. So what I mean by that is that there might be a sudden tick up in liquid coins, but the next buyers who buy them, you're never going to see them ever again.
They never sell.
Like Michael Saylor just announced they bought 5,400 whatever coins.
Yeah.
Do you think you're ever going to see those ever again?
No.
Right? Like that. Right. That to me is what's happening. So you might see a short-term tick up in liquid supply, but I think it's probably the last time, because the next buyer that's coming in knows how to access financing, knows how to access the financial system in order to generate liquidity on a long-term investment.
So you could see a future where people are maybe borrowing against their Bitcoin. They're using their Bitcoin for collateral. So once they buy, they never have to sell because they can just borrow against it.
I think the future, yes, I absolutely think that. The problem is that most people are not sophisticated enough to execute that properly. So you would need to be very, very smart on how you execute that. Otherwise, you will get liquidated out of your position. And I think the average person should not screw around with any Bitcoin lending, especially in 2023. I don't care who anyone is. I don't think you should be fucking around with lending against your Bitcoin in 2023. Wait until 2033, and then I guarantee you there's going to be some better options out there, unlike fucking BlockFi, Celsius, and all this bullshit
Yeah.
that was out here. So wait until 2033 and then figure it out. Until then, hold on to your Bitcoin as hard as you can, and just wait, because the financial markets are developing. There will be a time where BlackRock will say, or no, BlackRock, someone like JP Morgan, even though they just did a ban in the UK, but they will turn around at some point and say, we want you to put your Bitcoin up as collateral at JP Morgan, because they can lend against it. So it makes sense. It makes sense for them to accept it as collateral because they can lend against it 20-1. But
Would
you
you
need someone big enough that's able to carry, or able to sustain the cost to carry on the asset while the asset is fluctuating. Someone like BlockFi can't do that. So they get screwed over.
do you think an ETF is kind of a step in that direction where we could maybe have Bitcoin banks where you could deposit your ETF Bitcoin and then borrow against that?
Well, this is the thing. Everyone thinks that that's a new market. That's not a new market. That's the idea of stock loans against, the S&P 500, SPY ETF, or QQQ, the NASDAQ ETF. It's been around for decades. So that's the other thing that people are not realizing. The second the ETF comes out, I can now open up the lending markets on Bitcoin through the ETF. There's no new bank needed. There's no new regulation needed. There's nothing. That's already there. It's already available. And the only thing that the banks will need to determine is what the loan to value is on the ETF. And they then don't need to worry about custody. They don't need to worry about how many wallets you got, where the wallets are, is it secure? All of those insurance risks go out the window completely. So I think there will be a small market for people who want to loan against their actual Bitcoin, but then they'll be paying unchained capital rates of 12%, and you borrow against the ETF, and I think you'll get much more. Someone's having fun outside. You'll get a lot more. You get a lot more favorable interest rates by doing it through the ETF. And that's where I think most smart people, because if you're doing $1 billion of Bitcoin and you want to borrow against it, paying 12% versus 3% is a huge hit. So you'll just say, because you understand markets, all you say is, fine, I'll deposit my Bitcoin into the ETF and take a loan position against the ETF, and I save 9%. I'm doing that all day.
Yeah,
I don't care what
absolutely.
toxic Maxi has to say.
So these sophisticated investors, will call them for no better name of the word, that are gonna accumulate Bitcoin, never sell, borrow against it. Do you think investors that are getting into the market today, their biggest mistake is not just accumulating, trying to add leverage to increase their exposure? What do you think the biggest mistake new people in the market are making, or existing people that have been in Bitcoin for years and are still kind of not at the point they want to be in terms of how much Bitcoin they actually own?
Is not accumulating fast enough. That's the single biggest. I mean, you've seen my videos. I say, like, you need to get to one Bitcoin. The average person needs to get to one Bitcoin as a minimum, right? As fast as humanly possible. I wouldn't worry about, at this point, I wouldn't worry about, what price you buy it at. I wouldn't worry about any of that. Maybe once you get to the first Bitcoin, then for the second Bitcoin, start worrying about trying to time the markets to get the right price. But for the first Bitcoin, what's more important is you just getting your hands on the damn Bitcoin. And most people are not doing that. The worst thing I can think of is people trying to fucking DCA into the markets. And DCA, let me just clarify before everyone starts jumping at me on what DCA means. True DCA is when you've got, say, 100 grand in the bank or 10 grand in the bank, and you say, I'm just going to put a trickle buy order of, $500 a week. But the 100 grand sits there. A DCA is not, oh, I got paid today, so therefore I'm going to DCA into Bitcoin. No, what you're doing there is doing a lump sum purchase on a monthly basis. I'm talking about pure DCA. And, there's a study out there that what's his name? I've forgotten his damn name. There's a study out there. I'll send you the link to the study. You can put it in there. And he compared Bitcoin as a lump sum purchase to DCA, and the lump sum purchase wins every fucking time for a long-term investor. Stop worrying about it. Get into it and understand what the asset is, and decide to buy it and execute. Stop wasting time. Everyone's wasting time. You're wasting time in a race against scarcity, and in a race against scarcity, scarcity always wins.
I completely agree. And I think a lot of it as well is people's minds have maybe been somewhat warped by seeing people on Twitter go from a few $100 accounts to $1 million accounts on the next big pump and dump scheme, and have just got this emotional bias in the mind, the short-term thinking that they want to, 10x, 100x their portfolio, and in the end, they actually damage their returns. I think if a few years ago you'd have told people you can bank 20, 30, 40, 50% annual growth, that's like nothing we've ever seen before. But for some reason, in the current day and age, anything less than 100% annual returns is terrible. So I think a lot of it is this short-term thinking at a detriment to their long-term accumulation by just playing these short-term games and not actually seeing the bigger picture of where Bitcoin can be in 5, 10, 20 years time, rather than just focusing where it is in 3, 5, 10 weeks time. It's I think that's probably one of the biggest issues we're seeing.
Yeah, and you know what that's going to lead to? It's going to lead to my friends, the boomers, kicking the millennials' asses on the newest technology. Because why? Because boomers understand long-term accumulation. The boomers understand holding on to assets and never letting them go. Why? Because they've been kicked in the face 3 or 4 times already in their life, where you got these millennials trying to do it for the first time and not realizing that just buying Bitcoin, shutting the fuck up and getting fabulously wealthy is an option. Whereas the boomers know that. And most importantly, the boomers have missed it. The boomers have missed Apple. They've missed Tesla. They've missed these things, right? And so the pain of missing something, there is nothing more for an investor than the pain of fucking knowing something and missing it. Like, there is nothing that you can tell me that is worse than that, because there's embarrassment attached to that. There's pain attached to that. There's money that you already spent in your mind attached to that. So there's a lot of emotion attached to missed opportunities. And boomers understand that, whereas these millennials don't understand that. So the millennials are going, hey, if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. The boomers understand what it means. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And so they won't fall for it. So the millennials are about to lose their Bitcoin to the boomers.
I would probably add to that in that I think a lot of millennials actually have also experienced that, but in the forms of seeing Dogecoin go to nearly $1 or something. And there's always the friend that, I bought Bitcoin in 2012 at a few dollars and now I'm fabulously wealthy. So I think people, millennials especially,
that's maybe you and I.
Of course, yeah.
That's you and I that are in the investment space. What about the morons that were studying media studies? They haven't experienced anything like that. But right? Or art.
Do you think they'll look to leverage to be like, I need to make up for the lost time? And do you think that's maybe compounding their mistakes to say, not only have I got in late, let's just borrow and use leverage and then end up getting liquidated and missing out on just simply buying Bitcoin now? I know there's always the hindsight of, oh man, if I'd have bought Bitcoin here, if I'd have sold here. But in my opinion, the second best time to buy Bitcoin is today.
Absolutely. So they're going to have to now acknowledge that they were wrong really quickly and start acting right. The problem is that there's no second chance, right? The boomers might have missed Tesla or Apple, but they got an opportunity on Tesla, right? They might have missed that, but they get an opportunity on NVIDIA and AI. That's not going to happen with Bitcoin. You got one fucking chance.
So what would you say to the investors getting into the space and saying, but Shiba Inu coin or this next flash in the pan altcoin, this is the new Bitcoin, this is what's going to overtake the market?
I'd say that you are heavily misguided on what the true opportunity of Bitcoin is. And I'd say while I could absolutely turn around and say, have fun staying poor and do that bullshit, the truth is that we're at a point with Bitcoin where this is more important than anything that we've ever experienced. So at this point, I want to try and popularize the idea of caring harder, not crying harder, right? So when everyone says cry harder, I think it's important for us now to care harder for people and help them understand what the fuck is actually going on here and what this opportunity is. So I would implore them, if they think that, I would say, fine, you think that, that's absolutely fine. Just take the opportunity to understand the true opportunity of Bitcoin. And once you do that, if you still want to invest in Shiba Inu or whatever coin, go ahead and do it. At the end of the day, I'm a capitalist. You got the right to make or lose money, right? You got the right to be stupid with your money. I don't, that's fair market. So go ahead and do what you want to do, but truly understand the true opportunity of what Bitcoin is.
I'm assuming you don't hold any other altcoins, we'll call them, any other cryptocurrencies. Are you
No.
just strictly Bitcoin?
I must admit, I dabbled in them, right? Because when you're as an investor, you're coming new into the market, you need to see what all this shit is about. So I dabbled in them, but no, I don't have any of that anymore.
Yeah, I'm the same. I do think they have their place, especially Bitcoin being a software, which again I think is something a lot of people maybe fail to consider, that it can evolve and improve and the technology can get substantially better. So I do think altcoins coming into the market with great tech innovations. I'm not necessarily saying that, NFTs on Bitcoin is necessary. I think these innovations are kind of just driven by human greed. But if we can potentially use altcoin technology to improve Bitcoin's second layer and Lightning Network to make it operate a bit more frictionless as a peer-to-peer currency, then I'm all for it. So I see them as opportunities for technology that could eventually just be absorbed into Bitcoin. So
Like I always say this, I'm a capitalist, right? I want, the only difference between me and everyone else is I want to fix the underlying system first. Once you do that, we all have a right to speculate. So if you think that we have fixed the underlying system, which is Bitcoin, and now you want to bring in NFTs on top of Bitcoin, try it. It's a free market. Try it. The market will tell you whether you're an idiot or not, right? If you want to bring in, the US dollar on Bitcoin rails, try it. The market will tell you whether you're an idiot or not. But for me, it's very, very important to fix the underlying issue, which is 230 years of financial subjugation that humanity has been through based on the fiat system that we're in. And that's what I focus on. I want to fix that first. And once we're building on something that's stable, it's a free market. You got the right to make and lose money.
I completely agree. And on the same topic, do you believe then maybe one of the biggest misconceptions about Bitcoin is it's just an opportunity to make some money? Do you actually think that maybe they're missing the bigger point, that it is the opportunity to maybe fix the broken traditional financial system?
It's not my place to judge how people come to Bitcoin, right? Because I think what's important is you come to Bitcoin however you come to Bitcoin. I understood it as scarcity, right? That's the pin that dropped for me. Some people understood it as a humanity saving technology. That's the pin that dropped for them. Some people will understand it as just a trade, and that's okay. Come to it. But then, what will happen is you'll buy that Bitcoin and then you'll think about selling it and you go, fuck else am I going to buy? I can't just hold dollars. So Bitcoin will fix you one way or another.
Completely agree. I remember when the pin dropped for me a few years back, and initially I was the guy that had heard about it and saw the profit and was like, damn, that could have been me. I could have been the one, jetting across the world rather than sat in this office. And it was actually afterwards when I lost all the money. I think it's a similar story for a lot of people, where you deep dive into it and say, okay, remove the element of just it being a vehicle for profit. What actually is this? What does it actually mean? How can this actually improve not just my financial situation, but kind of the broader market? And then after that, after I kind of fully understood it, that's when the pin dropped. And I think anyone that hasn't had that pin drop moment maybe just lacks the complete understanding of what it is as a commodity, as a money, as this new digital asset.
I agree with you, but I'm very empathetic to people coming in and discovering it at their own pace. The only thing I want to, so a lot of people say you have to understand something before you put your money into it, right? I just don't agree with Bitcoin. Like, just dump your money into it, start getting the heart palpitations with the volatility, and then guess what you'll do? You'll focus on it and learn about it. And as you do that, you'll understand what it is, why it's important, etc., etc.
I agree again. So obviously we discussed before a lot of traders and new people getting into the space, probably quite emotional, and especially those that don't have huge amounts of capital. Once you see that volatility you just mentioned, and maybe that might be too much for them to handle, they sell. Do you watch price action? Do you take into account the wild swing? Yeah.
Yeah, I have to, because it's just in my DNA. Like, I've been doing this for too long, doing investing for too long. And of course, my role in this space now, as someone who has a YouTube channel, is trying to keep people informed, is to keep up to date on what the hell's going on. So yes, but do my parents really watch the price action on a day-to-day basis? No, not really. If they see it in CNBC, they'll check the price and see what's going on and panic about it or be happy about it. But generally speaking, they don't. And I don't think most people should. It just depends on what position you want to play in the space. And I have to.
Yeah. Obviously myself too, look into Bitcoin and I think for a lot of people that maybe do get a little bit emotional and aren't prepared for the volatility, I think at least to begin with, there's a lack of awareness that you can actually use this asset to check on-chain data. I think a lot of people, like we said before, treat it maybe as a stock or a commodity, but because it is this sort of digital money, we can actually see what investors are doing. We can see the most opportune moments for accumulation.
It's an organism.
Exactly.
It's a living organism, right? And what people are doing with the price action is checking the heartbeat without realizing that you can actually check all the organ functions. Yeah. Which is what you guys do.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating to actually, you can almost see mass psychology at play when you see price exponentially run up, and then you can see more and more people buying at what ends up being the top in a bull market, the absolute peak in price. When if you just take a step back and you can see this crazy greed in the market, and then the exact same is true on the downside. Once we see a huge collapse in price action, and you can see the fear on chain, you can actually see investors losing hope. You can see them becoming completely fearful in the markets. And of course, acting as a contrarian, doing the opposite of what a majority are doing, tends to play out the best. And it's just an asset we don't.
I'm really glad. Yeah, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I'm really glad that you guys are now on YouTube actually demonstrating how to read and utilize the charts that you guys have. Because I know, when I first came across you guys, it was like, here it is, figure it out. There's like written explanations, but I really like and appreciate the fact that you guys are now actually showing people how to read this data, because this is completely new. People are used to reading price charts. They're not used to reading HODL waves. They're not used to reading, illiquid supply, and that's what they need to read, because this is a living organism. This is no longer, just you're not just reading a heartbeat here. You got to read. You can read what's happening to the liver to figure out what's eventually going to happen to the heartbeat, and that's what I think you guys allow with Bitcoin.
That's what we're trying to do, and we really appreciate the shout out. And obviously, we'll try continue doing what we're doing. I think this has been a great chat, and we've really enjoyed your perspective. But quickly,
my pleasure. Yeah.
I know you say you watch price action a little bit, but really we need to look at the bigger picture. But everyone's going to want to know, what's your price prediction potentially for 3 months from now, 3 years from now, and 3 decades from now?
Oh, Jesus. 3 months from now, I have no idea. It could be 20,000. It could be 60,000. 3 years from now, I think you're looking at 280 plus. And what was the last one?
3 decades from now.
Oh, 3 decades from now, $10 million a coin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that in today's money?
That's or the you... one. That's today's buying power, and that's what I'm most certain about.
Yeah, I think I agree. My confidence in longer term price predictions is almost. I'm more confident in those than I am in the short-term price predictions. And I know the range of my long-term ones might be absolutely massive, like trillions of dollars in market cap, but it seems so much more predictable, just given the adoption that we're seeing, given all the fundamentals that we're seeing coming up, given the economic conditions, than purely speculating on more shorter-term price action. So I agree with you on that fact.
I think in less than 2 decades, people with $100 million of net worth will be struggling to buy one Bitcoin. And I don't mean the price is going to go to 100 million. What I'm saying is that if I have $100 million net worth, most of that's going to be tied up in assets. And generally speaking, right now, that's tied up in real estate for people at that level. And it's hard to sell off real estate to buy an asset you know nothing about, right? It takes emotional grit to do that. So I think most people at $100 million net worth won't be able to buy one full Bitcoin within the next 2 decades.
That'd be a future I'd like to see, and one we could hopefully both benefit from, and hopefully anyone that's appreciating the content we put out and trying to actually send the message to and educate on can appreciate and take advantage of as well, especially given the fact that I think, again, a lot of short-term nature is taking over the fact that we're on the cusp of potential ETF approval. We're on the cusp of a supply shock given the halving event early next year. And we're on the verge of potentially seeing a divergence and decoupling, a decorrelated, sustained period from traditional markets as people really learn and understand what the asset truly is. So I think it's exciting times ahead. I think people are maybe just have tunnel vision on short-term profits based on their own emotions, but zoom out and use some basic metrics that look into Bitcoin. Look at some great analysts like yourself who can shed some light and some great insight on the fundamental happenings, and then suddenly the picture becomes crystal clear.
I completely agree.
So can you tell everyone where we can find you, British HODL?
The easiest thing for you to do is go to youtube.com, which everyone should know, and just type in British HODL and you'll find me.
Okay, no problem. Are you on Twitter? I know you're on Twitter, but
I am on Twitter, but YouTube is probably easiest. But if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm also British HODL on Twitter too.
Amazing. And would you care to conclude this chat with your 3 famous rules for Bitcoin?
Listen, there's only 3 rules to Bitcoin. And before we even get to the 3 rules, the only question that anyone should be having after listening to this conversation is how close they are to getting to their 1 Bitcoin. Michael Saylor's out here buying 5,000 Bitcoin at a time. You need to focus on getting to 1, because as Michael Saylor knows as well, there are only 3 rules to Bitcoin, which is step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.
Thank you very much, British HODL, and thank you all very much for watching our inaugural look into Bitcoin casual chat, whatever the name, we'll figure that out later. But thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. To celebrate our first collaborative effort, we'd like to provide a 30% discount code for all new site subscribers. Use discount code BHODL for a discount that will last forever. So truly incredible lifetime value. But it actually gets better than that, as this discount code is on top of our current 60% discount we have to commemorate all of the new charts, tools, and features we've recently added to lookintobitcoin.com. Together, this is totaling well over a 70% discounted rate, but act fast as this deal will only last for 72 hours from the time of this video being published. Make sure you don't miss out on accessing exclusive metrics and resources on the most popular Bitcoin charts platform.